Look what we're working on today. Keep watching. Welcome to Icing TV. My name is Janelle from Enticing Icing Cake Design. Today we're going to be working on a Finding Dory cake. So this Finding Dory cake is going to look a little bit like the seabed with the coral and the fish and the seaweed and whatnot. So the first thing we want to do is level the cake. Now we normally build up the edges of the cake to maximise the height, reduce wastage. We just get a little bit of the cake and run it around the edge here. Once your cake has been filled with ganache and it's got ganache around the edge of it, it's hardly noticeable. So it is a good way to reduce your wastage. However, if you want to have a whole lot of half-made truffle prepped cake crumbs in your freezer, by all means go for it. It's a fantastic and fast way to have treats made in no time at all. For when those children say just before they're walking out the door, "Oh Mum, we're supposed to be bringing cupcakes for school today." I think all kids like to eventually pop those kind of things, on you, which you can actually throw them together in 10 minutes, the chocolate truffles. So yeah, that's what I have them pre-prepped for. Also parties and whatnot. Now normally I would have an 8-inch STD or set up cardboard for an 8-inch cake, but because I may or may not be doing some carving on this cake, I'm making it just slightly smaller, so it's a 7-inch. But as you can see, it's not a terrible lot of difference. Just turn it over. Take off the baking paper. Just going to put a thin layer of ganache between each tier. I prefer to work with my cakes cold, set in the fridge. I don't like to usually put a cake together the same day it was baked because I feel that I just don't have enough stability in the cake. I like it to be cold. Some people freeze them. I prefer just them straight out of the fridge after a couple of hours, overnight preferably. Okay. Turn it upside down. That doesn't look anything like the bed of the ocean. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this at a slant. Now I'm going to put that in the fridge. Once it sets a little bit, I'll be able to carve a little bit more around the edges, but I don't want to do any carving until it's set because it will fall apart. Now we're going to carve this cake. Ideally you'd use a bread knife, but a steak knife is good. Just to take off the sharp looking edges. We're going to put the cake now on the board and do the ganaching on there. So I'll just need a thin bead of ganache because it's already on a cardboard, set-up board. Just want to do a crumb coat. Okay, so now that we've got the ganache on, I'll just start smoothing. Now we're going to put a second coat on it, but I think we need to pop it in the fridge for a little while. Now for this Dory cake, what we've actually done is needed some white fondant and some darker blue together. So we have a water effect, which just spray the cake with a little bit of water to hold the fondant down. We'll just pick up the fondant and lay it over the cake. So because we're going to be using the fondant on the board as a board cover, we've smoothed it out nice and flat as we can get it while we're in this position. We'll just trim off the excess now. Just got these flexi smoothers. I like to just run it along the cake board. Smooth out any lumps and bumps. If you get air bubbles in your fondant when you're rolling it out or at any point, I find the easiest way to get rid of them is if you get a acupuncture needle. It leaves less of a mark on your fondant than a normal needle does, just because it's so much thinner. I'll just run around it with running my finger over the top of it to get off any burrs. Okay, working with our template for Dory, what we've done is we've moulded a piece of fondant onto skewers. I just laid it over the shape of the fish and moulded it into shape. Now what we need to do is put the dark blue bordering on black colour on Dory. So what I'm going to do is cut out this darker area here, including the tail. And I'm going to then lay that as a pattern on the fondant and cut that out. I've rolled out the fondant first so it can harden a little bit. So while I am cutting out the pattern, it hardens and it won't be quite as stretchy when I lift it up off the bench. So now that I've cut that out, I'm just laying that over the top of the fondant. I might actually even make this piece here a little wider so I can cut it off, because that's the top part of the fish. So I can cut it off as an excess because it doesn't allow, the pattern doesn't allow for the height here. Okay. Just applying a little bit of glue on the back here. Actually just going to lower that on. There we go. What we can do is smooth this down a little bit over the back. Now there is a fin. A fin? Yeah, a fin. They go across the back here of the fish. So what we'll do is just cut off this excess here. Now for that fin, I actually want to have the fondant nice and thick so it's got a bigger surface area for it to stick to. So far that's what we look like. So we just need to shape a fin which is, looks like a 90-degree right angle, I've got to be honest. Lack of better description, that's what we're going to go with. Okay, so we now need to put a little bit of the darker blue on top of that. It's layered. There's lots of colours on this. Now we need a little yellow piece to go on top of that. So that's Dory's fin. So what we need to do is we need to pop it on there like so. Lay that on there. Trim the excess off. We'll just put some lines in. Now Dory needs an eye. This is quite difficult because everything on me at the moment is either stained blue or black. You're best to make Dory the day before. It will give you some more setting time. Okay, so we're going to construct the cake now. Just need to pick your best side. I do have a blemish here on the cake, which is not a problem because we're going to put some coral there. Now, we're using brown sugar today as sand. We're going to put Dory in place first and then all the decorations around it. Okay, because Dory is quite a heavy little soul, I always say to people when they're putting together their cake, if they're going to have heavy decorations to be put into the cake, you're better off to make sure your cake is something like a mud. You have more stability. I think if we put Dory more to the back here, we don't want it to go right in, we want it to be sitting up a bit. So then we can actually surround her with some seaweed which we've made. The seaweed was just fondant with tylose in it, cut with a pastry cutter. So one of these pastry cutters, the pattern side. Tylose, put a little stick in the back using glue and left it overnight to dry. So if we just surround her with some seaweed, if we put a couple of pieces at the front of her, that will hide the sticks and it'll look like she's swimming through it. So we're going to make some coral. If you get a little ball of fondant about that size, roll it in your hands and turn it into a cone. Once you have that shape, all you have to do is get your modelling tool and press it into the centre of the cone. Now, if you can make multiples of those and put that in little groups. Another type of coral we make is what I call brain coral. So I get a piece of fondant, little round ball, and I just put little dimples in it with the end of the paintbrush. You can make these beforehand or you can actually roll them into a ball, put them on the cake and then put the dots in them. Either way, that's another great little coral. The third type of coral that we make is this type. Now what we do is we roll out some fondant that's got tylose in it. We put some little skewers at the back and cover the skewers and glue them into place with another piece of fondant. Cut around the edge of the coral with a tin cutter and then cut some out in the centre. Now we make sea snails as well. So once again, everything always seems to start with a ball. We roll a piece of fondant into a ball and then into a sausage, making sure the sausage is thin on either end. Then what we do is cut that in half and roll one end in like that. Roll the other end in and you've got two sea snails. So to make the sea stars, I just roll out quite thick a piece of fondant. I don't want it thin, I want it nice and thick. I have a piece of Glad wrap here, I'll fold it over 4 times. I lay that over the top of the fondant. Then I get a star cutter and I press the star cutter into the fondant. And there you go, you've got a nice plump little sea star. Now that we've got the coral, sea stars and sand in, the cake is complete. Sand is brown sugar and we often use it to represent sand. We do recommend that when using the sand on a cake that you don't put it on until you're actually at the location that you plan on cutting the cake at, because it doesn't travel well. It has a tendency in transport to bounce off the cake. Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be helpful, make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow us on Facebook, Pinterest and Instagram, and don't forget to share it with your friends.